What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for being a loyal listener of the podcast. If you haven't already gotten my first book, Live Better Now, it's officially out on Amazon.com. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone that's already purchased the book, reviewed the book, or shared it with friends and family. It really, really means a lot to me. Thank you guys so much. Go ahead and visit Amazon.com and purchase Live Better Now.
Ads, they're old. I mean, they're not on anymore, but there was a guy who did this ad for a sponge-like product called ShamWow.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, so you got to Google that and see that guy because you got that on your Jeep.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Dr. Hammer, MD Hammer.
Yes. You call me quick.
I feel grateful to have you on the podcast today. To all those people that are listening on Spotify, Audible, or Apple Podcasts, my guest today is the one and only MD Hammer, Greg Hammer, a professor at Stanford University School of Medicine, pediatric intensive care physician, pediatric anesthesiologist, mindfulness expert, and the author of Gain Without Pain, the Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Professionals. It's always a pleasure having a conversation with someone who's deep in the game, who's intelligent, and my viewers love having conversations about mindfulness, about personal growth, about health, and I think you are the epitome of the type of guest that they want to hear from. So MD Hammer, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast today.
Great to be with you, Zach.
Awesome. So, I'm not really sure exactly how we should start this conversation, but why don't you start by telling everybody about your book, Gain Without Pain, the Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Professionals?
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying that I believe very firmly that happiness is our true nature. And why is it that we're not happier? Well, our happiness is apparently veiled by the way our brains are wired. And this is something that has transpired over tens of thousands of years of evolution. And two examples of characteristic of the way our brains function. One is we all have a negativity bias. So we tend to hold on to things that are negative, thoughts that are negative, remembering experiences that are negative, and forget about all the positive ones. So we tend to think, oh, my back hurts. And we focus on that when we're getting out of bed instead of all the wonderful opportunities that this day represents. And I'm going for a hike with a friend today, and I'm going to be in the forest, and it's going to be wonderful. But no, we're thinking about our back pain, right? So, or we're thinking about an uncomfortable interaction we had with somebody else. So we tend to think of the negative at the expense of the positive. And the other, another way that our brains work, Zach, is that we're very distracted and preoccupied with thoughts of the past and the future in ways that are maladaptive. So it's adaptive to think of the past as we savor the wonderful times, and I remember tomorrow how great it was meeting you on this podcast. That's adaptive. It's adaptive even to think of mistakes that we've made to the extent only that we don't repeat them. But it's maladaptive to dwell on those mistakes. Here's where our negativity bias creeps in. And we think of all the things that we shouldn't have said or shouldn't have done. We judge ourselves harshly, and we have regret and shame and low self-esteem because we overthink the past in a negative way. Well, and the future, similarly, it's adaptive to plan for good times, to plan to put bread on the table, as it were. But beyond that, we, with our negativity bias, tend to catastrophize. We think of the worst thing that can happen. Now, for me, in my profession, as I work with critically ill children, it may be adaptive to catastrophize at work and think of the worst thing that can happen so I can plan to prevent it.
Sure.
Most of us, and when I get home from work, it's maladaptive to have this negative preoccupation with the future. And so the fact is that our brains have these sort of difficult qualities, but we also have a wonderful quality that's called neuroplasticity. That means we can change the way we think. And so we need to be intentional. And I'm going to reference one of my heroes, Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is really one of the founders of mindfulness, if you will. He started a mindfulness-based stress reduction program at the University of Massachusetts in the late 70s for people with chronic diseases that were refractory to conventional treatment, and they had depression and so on. He defined mindfulness, and I would submit that this can be the definition of happiness, as awareness of the present moment on purpose, non-judgmentally. So here are three, at least, important principles. One is awareness of the present moment. It's
Sure.
actually the only moment that we ever experience, right?
Right.
Everything else in our consciousness is just thoughts, and thoughts come and go. But the present moment is what we truly experience, and that's where happiness resides. And that's where mindfulness is. That's the focus of mindfulness, is to be present
Right.
on purpose. Why on purpose? Well, that's the reason that I sort of laid the groundwork by saying that our brains work with a negativity bias and with preoccupation of the past and the future. So if we're not purposeful, if we just sort of relax and lapse into our default way of thinking, it's going to be negative and preoccupied.
Uh-huh.
So we need to be purposeful about the way we think and therefore the way we are. And non-judgmentally. So awareness of the present moment on purpose, non-judgmentally. Why non-judgmentally? Because our brains are very analytical and we're very wary. Think of early Homo sapiens 50,000 years ago, sitting in a cave, keeping the fire going, and there might have been a saber-toothed tiger lurking outside the mouth of the cave. And the caveman or woman had to be wary of that possibility. There was constant danger.
Yes.
And the wary individual tended to live longer and procreate more. And therefore, the genes that encoded for these characteristics of the sort of negative, wary way of thinking propagated in the population. So here we are 50,000 years later, and this is hardwired into the way we think. So again, the good news is we have this quality called neuroplasticity. If we're purposeful, we can rewire our brains because we no longer have a saber-toothed tiger lurking outside the mouth of our cave. We don't live in caves, most of us. And granted, some of us do have that threat going on, but most of us don't, and we're very fortunate, and that's a source of gratitude, that most of us live in a pretty safe place. So non-judgmentally, let's drop the judgments. Things don't have to be good or bad. We spend a lot of energy that is wasted labeling things, and with our negativity bias, we tend to judge things around us, other people, and most importantly, and most harshly, we judge ourselves harshly and negatively. So, awareness of the present moment on purpose, non-judgmentally, these are expressed in the GAIN method: gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment.
Interesting. I knew you were going to somehow tie them together. I was waiting for you to close the loop and put a beautiful bow on it. And the present is there, no pun intended. Okay. But, there's so many different ways I want to go with this conversation. And, there's so many metaphors and analogies and real world situations that we could reference that, kind of just culminate everything you discussed. But the one thing, the story that comes out at me when it's like non-judgmentally is that story of the guy and the horse, and his horse runs away and someone says, "Oh, that sucks, your horse ran away." Like, he goes, "Oh, maybe so." And then a day later, the horse comes back with another horse. And then the person goes, "Oh my God, that's so amazing. You now have two horses." He goes, maybe so. He gets on the horse. He falls off the horse. He breaks his leg. He's paralyzed, whatever. They go, "Oh my God, you're paralyzed? That sucks." He goes, maybe so. The next day they come and they're drafting people for the war or battle. And that he doesn't have to go to war because he's now paralyzed. And they go, "Oh, you're so lucky. You don't have to go to war." And he goes, "Oh, maybe so." Right. So, there's no point in judging anything. And, it's so hard for us as humans to live in the present moment. And obviously we all acknowledge that it's the only moment we ever have. In the past, we experienced the past in the present, and we're going to experience the future in the present. But this is my question for you. Is it natural for us to live in the past and future? Or has society somehow, with 401ks and politics and money and social media, just got us away from the present moment?
Well, I think, Zach, that our true nature is that of the newborn. The newborn doesn't know anything about time, space, good, bad. They are just present. And when you look at that beautiful little body, they are just radiant. And actually, I think the same of the person on their deathbed who may have some dementia, who's just totally present and looks up at the family members surrounding their bed and says, "I don't know who you are, but I know that I love you." And again, this is the person who's not thinking about what happened yesterday or tomorrow. They're just thinking about the fact that they are sharing love with these other people. And I think that's really our natural state. We're born that way. We exit that way in many cases. And our true nature is to be happy. It's just that, as you suggested, those social forces and other forces make us overly distracted with the past and future and with this negativity bias.
Yeah.
And we could think of all the ways that that happens. And I think the factors that you mentioned, social media. So when we engage in social media, and not just you and I, but rather the humanity at large, there's a lot of judgment, for example, right? Look at how divided we are, not just social media, but the media in general is so polarized.
Yeah.
And each side is judging the other side.
Right.
And that's just, so what is it about, you might want to think that it is sort of something natural about that, because it does seem to be the way our brains go.
Mm-hmm.
It's, we call it human nature. Is it really our nature to be ungrateful, resisting painful things, unintentional, and judgmental? The opposite of gain, the opposite of grateful, accepting, intentional, and non-judgmental. I don't know. I think that's an age-old question. What is our true nature? But I like to think of our true nature as just happiness and being in the present moment. And this gets sort of, in a perverse manner, it gets sort of hijacked by the things around us.
Right. And to piggyback off of the polarity when it comes to the media and politics and things like that, you think it's because ego gets involved? When I think of like someone on social media, like a girl, for example, who has 500,000 Instagram followers, and she sees a girl that has maybe 1 million Instagram followers, and she's judging that person, or, this side is judging that person. It's because everyone thinks that they are right? Everyone thinks that their opinion is the opinion that is the most accurate. And do you think that ego has to come into play? And if ego does come into play, how do we disidentify from ego? And I assume there are some mindfulness practices you can share with us that might help us access that disidentification of ego. Am I completely off base here, or?
No, you're spot on, Zach. I think that ego, a way of looking at what is ego, is it certainly involves centrally a sense of the separate self. I am the separate person. So, the way that we bolster our ego is by judging other people negatively, putting other people down. If we're insecure, that makes us feel better. You don't see somebody who's perfectly at peace and present criticizing other people or judging other people. You mentioned the Instagram circumstance where one person has 5,000 followers and the other person has, 5 million followers. I think what might be the predominant reaction of the first person is, I'm not good enough. I'm inferior. And it's that sort of low self-esteem and insecurity that leads to categorizing other people, trying to bolster our self-image by putting other people down. But here's the thing. Ego is based on the notion that we are a separate self. And if we think we are a separate self and that we appear at some point, we live a life, and then we disappear, we are going to be very fearful, insecure, unhappy, anxious, because we are the separate self. What happens when we die?
Right.
If you think that you're just this separate entity and you're apart from everything else, that's a pretty scary notion. And that's really the basis of ego. So the obvious remedy for that is recognizing our true nature, that we are not the separate self. And, this incredible production on Netflix called Fantastic Fungi talks about have you seen it?
I've seen a little bit of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, you got to watch the whole thing. I mean, one of the beautiful things in that production is that the reality is that fungi are everywhere. They're like right below our feet when we're walking outside, and they form this infinite lattice network, kind of like our brain cells, our neurons,
Mhm.
and all the connections they have and so on, but even more extensive. And they really cover the earth, and they have almost an infinite number of connections. And it's really one grand mycelium. And actually, when we die, we kind of return to that mycelium, right? That's what happens when our bodies break down and so on. And so, in a way, this is very reassuring that we're simply part of this infinite lattice work that underpins the very earth itself. It's a living, breathing thing that is almost impervious to climate and other forces external to it. And the notion that we are part of this and maybe temporarily taking a different form, but returning, in fact, to the great
Yeah.
mycelium, it's reassuring because we're not separate. We're all
Circle of
joined.
life.
There is no such thing as a separate self. And so the gain way of thinking and being is simply acknowledgement of
Yeah.
that.
Now, you keep using the term separate self, and I want to hone in on that for a second because obviously I'm sure you know about Eckhart Tolle's work and Michael Singer's work and this idea of consciousness awareness and the idea that we are not our body and we're not our mind. And I don't know who it was. It was either Seneca or Aristotle or someone who said, I think, therefore I am. And actually, it was neither of them. It was who was it that said that?
I wish I
I
could
think
tell you, but
anyway, long story short, I am not
yeah.
Zach Rance, 5'9.5", 168 pounds with a six pack. No, I'm the awareness that I'm in this body, right? I'm not my thoughts. I'm the awareness of my thoughts because I have the ability to change my thoughts. When I walk into a party, for example, and I see 6'4" men who have bigger biceps than me, right? And I get very, my ego gets hit hard. I'm like, oh my God, XY. Sorry, I'm getting a call. Dang it. I'll edit that out. Sorry about that, MD Hammer. So I lost my train of thought for a second, and I don't know if this is a
You go out to the party and the guy's got a bigger
yeah,
biceps and an eight
my
pack.
ego. I have the ability to exercise my free will to see that thought pattern and disagree with it. Right? It's like
Well, I'm going to go you one further. You don't have free will. I mean, here's what I think. There's two models of the universe. One is the materialist model, and that is that consciousness, awareness, being arises from the brain. So we are this collection of molecules that, form tissues, that form organs, that form our human body. And we are a separate self, and we have a brain that's composed of neurons and, subcellular material that forms the neurons. And this idea of consciousness, awareness, being comes from the
is that
brain.
true?
That's one
Okay.
model.
What do you believe? You believe that our thought mind is from the
Unfortunately,
brain?
that's the prevailing model. The other model, which I
Okay.
embrace, is called the consciousness only model. And that is that consciousness, and you can substitute the word God, love,
Higher power,
awareness, being,
the
sure.
universe.
Consciousness is primary, and we are just temporary modulations of
Right.
consciousness. And I would use an analogy of the universe or consciousness being like a river, and we are akin to a little eddy in the river, right? We're made of the river. You can't take the eddy out of the river. The eddy just sort of seems to arise spontaneously, is very temporary, and then yields its energy back to the river and apparently disappears. It's never gone anywhere. It never arose and disappeared. It's just part of the river. It is the river. You can't take it away from the river. That is us. That is Zach. Zach is a little eddy in the river, which is consciousness. Consciousness is primary. and everything else is just a temporary modulation or change in the shape of consciousness. You can think of the ocean being the universe and consciousness, and there's a wave, and we could be either like the wave, very temporary reshaping or modulation of the ocean or consciousness, or maybe the little spray that comes from the wave. We're this temporary little droplet that's really not separate from the ocean, and it doesn't appear or disappear. It's a modulation of the ocean. And so I think that consciousness only model makes a lot more sense to me. The materialist, reductionist model just has too many holes in it.
Yeah, like who said that thoughts come from the brain? Whoever said that, you put two together and you always think that the brain has to do with thoughts, but who says that that's the truth? Now let me ask you this question. If somehow, some way, medical professionals were able to switch your brain with mine, and your brain went into my skull and my brain went into your skull, and you woke up the next day from surgery, would you be Zach? Would you have my biases of the environment and money and politics, or would you still be yourself just with my brain in your skull?
I'm going to have to blow that out of the water, Zach, by saying that I disagree with the premise of the question. There is no Zach. There is no Greg, aka MD Hammer. There is only consciousness. So, now you can kind of get into the picayune details and reductionist way of thinking about what happens if your brain is in, quote, your brain is in, quote, my body. And I mean, that would be a fun experiment. But in the end, they're just a couple of eddies in the river of consciousness. And, I suppose if that brain and this brain switch places, the eddies would take different shapes. But at no time is there really a Zach and a Greg.
At the end of the day, we can go back and forth, and no words can do it justice. Like, words are just signposts, right? So even the way we use the term consciousness, we use the term awareness, we use the term emotions, we use the term thoughts and mind, but somehow there is still a disconnect. You know what I mean? As far as like,
well, I'm going to leave you with this, Zach. I'm going to leave you with the notion that silence is God's language and everything else is a poor translation. So yes, words are a concession to what is real. Words are a concession to consciousness. They're not, you can't accurately describe how you feel, right? And the words that you say that describe or attempt to describe how you feel are not going to be understood by me in a way that informs me accurately of the way you feel. So yes, we use words. I mean, it's a tool, but we have to concede that we're missing something by the words that we use.
Okay, so let's get back to some emotions real quick. And I know you're super busy. I want to just get 5 more minutes of your time, but I want to hit home, and I want to bring some value to the audience. Obviously, this has been such an amazing podcast so far. To all the people who might have just chimed in, maybe you missed the introductory. My guest is MD Hammer, Stanford professor, School of Medicine. So let's talk about emotional intelligence. Let's talk about appreciation and acceptance and gratitude. Now, we have free will, and I know you don't believe in free will, but is there some way that we can feel appreciation by changing our thoughts? And if so, how do we do that?
Zach, you got to read my book, Gain Without Pain. The GAIN is an acronym for gratitude, acceptance, intention, non-judgment. So it starts with sitting down in a comfortable place, closing your eyes, hopefully in the morning after you've opened the blinds, and getting in touch with your breath, slowing it down. This reduces your heart rate and blood pressure and the adrenaline in your body. And then you go to your gratitude. So yes, gratitude, appreciation. We have so much for which to be grateful. So when you focus on gratitude, you're actually already beginning to rewire your brain away from this negativity bias, right? You're focusing on something positive. And, tonight when I do my little gratitude thing before I go to sleep, I'll do my little GAIN practice. I'll be grateful for this time we had, Zach. I'm just already enjoyed having you as a friend and being on your podcast. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to connect. It's a connection. It's a little bit of a loss of my sense of separation is connecting with Zach. Okay. And so I'm grateful for that. And then I go to acceptance, the A in game, because we have to acknowledge that there's pain in life. And so suffering, as the formula in my book would have it, equals pain times resistance. So the pain is there. You know, I lost my son. We've all lost loved ones. There's pain. When we resist it, when we try not to think about it, when we depersonalize the other, there's so many ways of resistance, we increase our suffering. So in the gain practice, we take something painful, we bring it in, we open our chest, we open our heart, we envelop it with our heart, we nurture it with our heart. We ask ourselves the question, can I live with this pain forever? And the answer is yes. And we've dropped our resistance and decreased our suffering. We move to intention because, as we've said, our brains are wired to be negative and distracted. And so the good thing is we have this property called neuroplasticity. We can rewire our brains, but we have to be intentional. If we lapse into an unintentional way of being, we go to negativity and distraction. So we use our intention to focus on the present moment and be more positive. Go back to the gratitude, be more positive. And then we go to the N in gain, which is non-judgment. We might picture an image of the moon or Earth suspended in space, one of these beautiful NASA images of the Earth. And we remind ourselves the Earth is neither good nor bad. Things do not have to be good or bad. The Earth is neither good nor bad. It's just a planet. And it's only rational for us to then look at ourselves. I am neither good nor bad. I'm simply the human that I am. I am simply that I am. I am. And we reconnect with the breath and slowly open our eyes. So I think, we're ready to go out in the world. And the thing is that we've already begun to rewire our brain. So when we find ourselves being unappreciative or ungrateful, a light bulb goes off. We remember we did our gain practice in the morning and we pledged to be grateful. So we redirect our thoughts toward gratitude. We snap out of it. When we find that we're resisting pain, we see somebody who's in a wheelchair and we think, oh, they probably did something to the, maybe somebody who's on oxygen, they smoke cigarettes, or we depersonalize them so that we can accept it. No, we drop that. We're resisting the pain that other humans are suffering. And then we go to, we find we're being unintentional. We're lapsing into this distraction. We're going over and over and over with something we said yesterday that embarrassed us, that we're ashamed, or we have low self-esteem. A light bulb goes off because we did our gain practice that morning and we realize we're lapsing into this unintentional way of thinking. So we go back to our intention and the present moment and we have a little laugh at ourselves. And same thing with judgment. We find we're judging the guy who changed lanes ahead of us without using their turn signal, and we start to make judgments about them. And we recognize that we do it because that light bulb goes off and we smile and we let go of that thought. We have a little laugh and we remember that, hey, it doesn't do us any good to judge that guy. We might have done that too. So drop the judgment. And so, yes, this practice gradually rewires our brain and we become more aware of the present moment, more aware of our purposefulness, more aware of our ability to be non-judgmental. And slowly but surely, we see ourselves as the eddy in the river of consciousness.
That's it. Well said, Doc. Well, to all those people out there that are listening on Audible, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, head over to Amazon.com. Get your copy of Gain Without Pain, the Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Professionals by Greg Hammer. MD Hammer, with gratitude, thank you so much for your time today on the podcast. This was nothing short of a pleasure, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Absolutely, Zach. You know where to find me. It would be my pleasure, and it's been lots of fun.
Thank you. Talk soon.
Keep up the good work.
Appreciate it.